Calling G107, testimony in support.
Mr. Moderator.
Yes, sir.
Before you open the floor for testimony, there's an unpublished errata on this item, which I'd like to have up on the screen, and then I'll explain it. Oh, my crikeys. Pull it down and get it bigger. All the orange highlighted text, or most of it, is existing text which was left out of the proposal. We don't know why, but it just didn't show up when we finished it. There's a piece of the second section in 60241 starting with exterior wall assemblies that's highlighted in orange. That shows up in the monograph as underlined as if it's new text, but again, it's current text. So his changes are limited to the final sentences in each section and deleting the exception.
Okay, everybody clear? G107 in support.
Steve Scalco, Masonry Alliance for Codes and Standards. I want to acknowledge the fact is it is unfortunate. I think and by the way, I think it's more CDP access than anything else. But be that as it may, I want to also say for the record that I like the way CDP access generally works, so it's no fault with it. But I think I suffered from a major gremlin glitch because the language that didn't get showed up was existing code language, and I did not intend to delete it, even though it doesn't show up in the code change. Be that as it may, we'll stand on our supporting statement and let the committee do what they want.
Thank you. Further testimony in support. In opposition.
Paul Coates, American Wood Council. One of the chief changes in this would put in the words non-bearing for use of fire retardant treated wood in exterior walls, type 3, type 4, or type 3 at least, and type 4 as well. So the common interpretation of the code right now is that is not a restriction in the current code. Load-bearing fire retardant treated walls, type 3, type 4, and so forth are acceptable. And so this is a huge change, and so we would recommend you oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you. Further testimony in opposition.
Dave Boucher, Hoover Tree Wood Products, speaking in opposition. And this does eliminate the allowable use of fire retardant treated bearing walls. What I want to point out is the cost impact of the proponent. The code change proposal will not increase or decrease the cost of construction. Well, the primary reason that many developers are utilizing type 3 construction, specifically with the fire retardant treated wood bearing wall elements, is because of cost. It's substantially more cost effective to utilize these systems. So again, I think that rationale is faulty. I urge your disapproval. Thank you.
I have a question. You're saying that this would prohibit the use of FRT in the exterior walls?
In the exterior bearing wall.
Would you are you saying that because where the penetration occurs would have to be a non-combustible, or the use of fire retardant treated wood for the penetrating item?
It says in 602.4.1, fire retardant treated wood in exterior walls, non-bearing fire retardant treated wood in this section. It used to say FRTW, so now it says non-bearing.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further testimony in opposition.
Marcelo Hirscher, GBH International, speaking for NAFRA. And I want, Paul Coates pointed out to the non-bearing, and so did Dave Boucher, but they did not point out to the elimination of item 1, fire retardant treated wood sheathing in 60242. Again, there's no justification being presented for that. Please disapprove.
Thank you. Further testimony in opposition.
Larry Waynard, SBCA. We represent wall panel manufacturers, floor truss, roof truss manufacturers. This would have a devastating effect on our industry. There's a lot of manufacturers that provide materials, wall panels, especially into the Type 3 buildings. Currently FRTW, this would prohibit that in a lot of cases. Urge your disapproval. Thank you.
Thank you. Further testimony in opposition?
Tom Myers, Building Intuition, representing myself on this item. I want to point out, aside from the other technical issues that are raised here, I want to point out one major issue. It just indicates that we'll go ahead and provide a cladding that's non-combustible, but it doesn't give us any guidelines on what the type of material or the quality of the material needs to be. So effectively, I could go in here and put aluminum foil on the face of this and be compliant with this section. Thank you.
Thank you. Further testimony in opposition?
Margo Thompson with Newport Partners on behalf of NMHC. One other thing I wanted to point out is this section 602 points to...
Step into the mic, please.
Points to section 2303.2, which does in fact require that that adjustments be made for treated wood framing and sheathing in terms of allowable spans and loads. So by virtue of those requirements, calculations must be performed that show that treated wood is suitable for use in bearing walls. Thank you.
Thank you. Further testimony in opposition?
Joe Holland, Hoover Treated Wood Products. Fire retardant treated wood has been allowed in this type of construction. When you go back to the legacy codes, specifically the Uniform Building Code since the 60s, there are hundreds, perhaps even thousands of these buildings out there. With the single stroke of approval of this, you're going to make all of those buildings non-conforming. That doesn't make any sense. We urge you to recommend disapproval.
Another Me Too wave. Any further testimony in opposition? Rebuttal in support?
Steve Scalco for the Masonry Alliance, and I'm just going to offer a couple of rebuttal points here. For no other reason, let it go on the record why, in our opinion, this code change has validity. One of the first is, with regard to 2303.2, that's already existing language. We're not adding that. So whatever reference it sends you to Chapter 23 is not a concern of ours. With regard to the non-combustible cladding being added, we have test requirements that tell you how to test whether a material is non-combustible or not. That non-combustible cladding requirement was what was in the UBC, which is where this language was extracted from. It just didn't get placed into the IBC. And then my final comment is the UBC was silent on whether it could be load-bearing or not. The IBC is still silent on it. It doesn't say. It leaves you doubtful. But my comment is if you do a fire-retardant treated wood stud wall load-bearing, you're really type 6 construction because fire-retardant treated wood will not pass the non-combustible test. So in my opinion, the change is appropriate.
Thank you. Further rebuttal in support?
Not really in support, but in rebuttal. Carl Wren, Austin, City of Austin. Speaking for myself, the UBC did have the language that the required fire resistance rating is maintained, and it's not in the IBC. It was in the UBC. I tried to code change it in the last cycle to get that language back in, and I was told it was not necessary because it was required. But just as rebuttal, it did require the fire resistance to be maintained in the UBC.
Thank you. Further rebuttal in support? Rebuttal in opposition?
Joe Holland, Hoover Treated Wood. The IBC approaches the requirement that the exterior cladding has to be non-combustible. It does it through Chapter 14. So the requirement is still there.
Thank you. Any further rebuttal in opposition? Seeing none, Mr. Chair, G107 is yours.
Committee members, are we clear on the errata? Everybody can read it okay, so we know. I want to make sure we're aware of what we're voting on. I don't hear anyone speaking up, so I need a motion on G107, please. Mr. Grill.
Motion to disapprove.
I have a motion to disapprove and a second. Reasons, please.
Yeah, I don't see any reason to take away the allowance for bearing fire retardant treated wood. There's been no evidence shown to increase the requirements.
Ms. Gilland and then Mr. Catlett.
I think one of my big issues with this particular one is their cost impact statement. It's pretty clear that this would cost quite a bit more if we approved it, so
You're right.
against it.
All right, I have Mr. Catlett, who was flashing a moment ago, then Mr. Winkle, and then Mr. Belcher. Oh, me too. Okay, Mr. Catlett?
I was wondering why I was flashing, but anyway.
Must be something behind that, I think.
The code commentary, I took a look at that in preparation for this, and it appears that the code commentary indicates the FRT can be recognized, even though it's not non-combustible or not considered a non-combustible, it is still permitted without limitation. So I don't think that this wasn't addressed somehow previously in the code, and so I'm going to vote with the motion.
Are we square? All right, I don't see any more lights on. So, that being said, we have a motion before us for disapproval of G107. All those who support that motion, please signify by raising an appendage. And those opposed? That motion carries unanimously. Mr. Moderator, G107-18 is disapproved.
G107 recommended for disapproval. Is there an assembly action? Seeing none.